And resolved and peace is educated. At NIICE, we have 4 research centers: China Studies, Neighborhood Studies, Indo-Pacific Affairs, and Non-National Security Studies. India being an important neighbor of Nepal, it gets a special focus here at NIICE. So far, we have organized 40 discussions and debates on different aspects of India and have engaged with more than 25 with maritime concerns. Thus, the issues related to maritime that are of concern of India are equally a concern of Nepal as well. Second, through BIMSTEC and its connectivity projects like BIMSTEC Master Plan for Transport Connectivity, Nepal can have a greater role and visibility in the Indo-Pacific region. Great access and a greater role in Indo-Pacific, Bay of Bengal region, which lies in Indo-Pacific. Third, and most important, there is a deep connection between Himalayas and the Indo-Pacific waters. When India aimed to challenge China in the Indo-Pacific water, particularly the Indian Ocean, through Quad and several other initiatives, China started to challenge India in the Himalayan region, where China has its ace, and as Himalayan holds huge strategic stakes for India. Thus, every time India has pronounced its commitment to Quad or Indo-Pacific affairs or strategy, it has hit at the border standoff, incursions by China at the Himalayas. For example, be it Doklam in Bhutan, Pangong, so Sikkim, or Eastern Ladakh, Galwan Valley, and several others. So maybe in future, it can be translated as in Nepal as well, where India has huge strategic interest in this country. Coming with an Indo-Pacific outlook. Recently, Bangladesh has come with its own Indo-Pacific outlook. Indo-Pacific region has vast resources, as we all know, and opportunity for different countries around the world. Similarly, I believe that the 3 C's, 1, climate change, clean energy, and cross-border connectivity are going to transform Nepal's future. These 3 C's are also has 2 segments. The first segment is a keynote by our guest, Ambassador Pankaj Saran, former Deputy National Secretary Advisor of India, and he'll be speaking on perspective on India's Neighborhood First policy. And the second session is a discussion on Nepal-India relations. But before we start, let me request our guest to release a special report that Nepal and NatStrat have jointly worked on. But before that, let me welcome once again all of you, and especially Ambassador Pankaj Saran for coming here in Kathmandu and spending his time. Maybe I'd like to request him to introduce NatStrat.
Gentlemen, distinguished guests, distinguished panelists, and of course Pramod Jaiswal for this wonderful event today in the afternoon. Let me just give you a few brief words about NatStrat. NatStrat was born 1 year ago. It is located in Delhi. It's right now a small outfit, but it is a privately funded think tank. The objective of NatStrat is to promote an Indian narrative. Major powers, the United States, China, Russia, Europe. We are focusing on the Indian neighborhood. On national security, we are focusing on internal security challenges of India, as well as military security aspects. And on the technology and the economy side, which is one combined pillar, we are looking at how geopolitics and economics and technology all intersect. So we are actually engaged in projects on artificial intelligence, on looking at supply chains, weaponization of trade, finance, etc. In the last 12 months, we have brought out a few public Bangladesh. which has writers from India and Bangladesh. We have brought out one small publication on the Indus Waters treaties, which India has with Pakistan, signed in 1961, and it shows the different aspects of the treaty. And we now have today's book on Nepal, which has contributions from Nepalese writers and Indian writers. So we are building. We also have linkages and relationships with think tanks outside India, which we are developing slowly and organically. We also have a podcast channel, which I would invite all of you to watch. We have a website. So the idea of today's event actually came up from Pramod, and I said if we can do this. So we decided to bring this out, this joint booklet, and then he was very kind to invite me to Kathmandu and for this launch. And so here I am, and I hope that you will find this a small contribution to the further understanding and
would be based on what I heard from him, from others who are gathered together. And I have to tell you very honestly, I mean, this is a very is gathered here. Not only know I've worked with almost all of you. I have shared with you my opinion, my point of view, and listened to you on a variety of topics. Not only just India-Nepal relationship, but many other things that we have had opportunity to work with in the last so many years that we all have been in public life. Having said that, let me just try to reflect back upon what I heard. I mean, I made this point last night also with Ambassador Saran. What I heard in Bangalore, something very new to me. I mean, the whole meeting was very open, frank, candid. I was thoroughly impressed by diversity of opinion that I heard. This is not just good that was gathered there. And then somebody made a remark saying that yes, yesterday in San Francisco there were people who were gathered there, and they were saying was a Asia Pacific meeting. And the person, I mean, I don't need to name him, and that's not very nice. Said, when I understand what you're saying, and I think will provide a perspective to every one of you who have gathered here today. Said, we are not there, meaning India is not there. President Biden and Chairman Xi Jinping were there. India was not there, and then clearly the person makes a remark that that's not Asia Pacific. The mindset is in India today. If we do not understand that, we probably will be fools to not understand that. We probably will inflict more damage in India. It has become essential India, spiritual and economic linkages in close people-to-people context. Nepal appreciates India's neighborhood first policy. It reflects the importance that India attaches to its neighborhood. As the next door neighbor, Nepal is happy to work closely with India. As close neighbors, Nepal and India past, present, and future are connected. Our friendship and collaboration should be further strengthened for the progress and prosperity of our two peoples. And for us is how these youths can be productively employed and absorbed in Nepali society. 1,880 square kilometers of border have disputes at 72 different places in 20 source of Kali River, and claim over 335 square kilometers of area including the river. Both the countries should be flexible enough to understand each other's genuine interests and work together to are beyond resolution if Nepal and India put together their mind and heart to work. Thank you very much again for the invitation.
ups and downs, and with the ups and downs we've been able to mend places, and we've been able to plug issues where we need to plug also. Secondly, former Minister Minendra rightly said that we started when we were both ministers in the same cabinet, was the first petroleum pipeline project. It was a very difficult task to get it through. I think it was a dream of Nepal at that time to get this pipeline for 10 years, but we made it. The session is that we need a people-to-people relationship as well in coming days, because linked. But how we utilize this linkage depends on how we also work together to implement it. Third thing is, we talked about leadership, and one of the remarkable thing also we were able to achieve, and that shows the relationship between India. There would be almost like around hundreds of trucks coming in. The general was here. He was the chief of the army staff, who supported us a lot in getting all the things flying into different parts, because the logistic was a big challenge. So that way we were able to do a lot, and I think 2015 was also a remarkable year for us to see how our friendship has grown from that time and what we are today, and it will grow. And then the third and then the most important factor today is, we talk about climate change. I just attended COP28 in Dubai and came. And what we see in the world today with the climate, and we'll be able to share many things that we think should be needed. We talked about EPG. The Durgesh Ji is also here, who has also been ambassador in India, and many other scholars who've had one way or the other relation with India, worked with Indian government, in different capacity being in Nepal. So having said this, I would like to thank the organizer, and thank you very much.
I'd also like to request Mr. Pangasan to come. And technology and economic security. And Mr. Saran is presently convener of NatStrat and is a commentator on security and security strategic issues, and a distinguished fellow at.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Diplomatic Corps, dear friends and colleagues, Namaskar. I am delighted to be in Kathmandu at the invitation of NIICE and Mr. Pramod Jaiswal, and I want to start by thanking Pramod ji for this excellent arrangement that he has made and for setting this event so well. And I also want to thank all of you, each one of you, for taking time out to be present here today in the afternoon. I also want to thank the authors of the booklet that has been released today, and for their effort and for doing it at short notice, and for their commitment to promoting discourse and debate on India and Nepal relations, how they shape the future. I will also therefore talk about its results and discuss with you what lies ahead of us. Origins and logic of the neighborhood first policy. India has historically with acts of cross-border terrorism and violence. It has been made clear to Pakistan that India will not compromise on issues relating to national security and will take firm and decisive steps to deal with all decision to move ahead in developing its ties with all neighbors, because it sensed the mood in the subcontinent. Good progress was made with all neighbors, including Nepal, which was going through its own internal upheaval that led to its a similar pipeline between India and Bangladesh, between Siliguri and Parvatipur for HSD and for kerosene. I think these are connectivities which our region should have had many decades ago, but we are now gradually trying to create this network. But perhaps the biggest revolution in the relationship is probably going to come from the hydropower sector. More than 4,500 megawatts worth of hydroelectric projects in Nepal are under development by Indian companies, including the 900 megawatt Arun 3 hydroelectric projects. The Prime Ministers of both countries issued a joint vision statement in April 2022 on the power sector and surplus state.
Difficulties why so? If you want to really improve the situation, you are not ready to even receive that EPG report. It was not forced to implement by the Modi ji. EPG report is just to look, read and sit the two government and discuss. You are not ready to discuss about the Limpiadhura. What makes you difficult to sit with the authority and discuss? Why Modi ji and Nepal Prime Minister not sit and discuss about Limpiadhura and get the evidences, sit with the evidences and decide? If you are not doing this and only saying we have to open border history, this and that, it will not work. So if really India wants to change, it's my feeling as a Nepali, 21 days I was sitting hungry during the blockade time because there was no gas to go cook. So that type of feeling, it will be very hard for us to really trust what you are saying now or what Modi ji told to our parliament. You see what he told to the parliament and what he did in his real action. So please give your honest, not this diplomatic answer. Give why India is doing that. That is what I want to see. Thank you.
To get some security, at least in the border area. And despite of that, why we have problems and issues from time to time. Because we need each other to progress, we need each other to maintain peace and harmony, and especially for progress, development and prosperity of Nepal, we need Nepal and we need India's support. But why still we are lacking enough support from India? If we have all the I'll say, we have good relationship with people to people. We share resources. Our leaders, especially political leaders, they share their views. They meet each other. They have very good relationship. But from time to time, the reason why we are having problem is.
What we are, and Nepal is facing now is a huge trade deficit, and this is a very long-standing trade of Nepal-India trade relationship. So, as a very good friend of Nepal and as an expert to the international relations and as experienced fellow of this field as well, what is your frank suggestions to Nepali side to reduce or to get benefit from this kind of to come out from this trade deficit situation? Thank you very much.
I'm a journalist. I have a little different question, like going beyond this bilateral relation, because many questions have been already asked. So my question is, how has the landscape of national security evolved, particularly in the context of technological advancement and economic interdependence? Could you just highlight a bit in the context of our bilateral relation in recent years? Thank you.
One question for you, when we talk about relations, whether it's bilateral, multilateral, international and all, the language at the end of the day is all about power. So I would like to know, you've heard questions about, why are relations, you're talking, you are not walking the talk and all that sort of ideas are coming. What do you feel personally?
Deliberation. My only question is, in my lifetime, can I see the APG report? I'm very much curious to know what has come out of it. Thank you.
We have made mistakes in the past, that we have taken wrong decisions. But if we were to have a, let's say, a focused discussion on the context, the reasons, the circumstances, then maybe we would need a separate session altogether just to discuss why it happened, what triggered it, etc., etc. But when we look back in hindsight, it is possible that they were wrong judgments. I mean, the question to ask is also, to be fair, as to what triggered them. I mean, we understand something that has to be done. Now, unless you want a public diplomacy kind of effort. That is one approach. The other is let the two governments sit and discuss and see what is the best way forward to resolve these issues. We have differences with China that go back to 1959. We have held, so many rounds of talks with China to resolve these discrepancies. Sometimes, or rather, we think we are getting close. Sometimes we think we are getting close, but we are actually not. So what has happened is that when the relationships between the two countries, India and China, were more stable, we signed agreements, let's say on peace and tranquility, or to maintain status quo, or to maintain, or to ensure that there were no deaths on the border, there was no fighting on the border. So you manage a kind of a border which existed, which was imperfect. There were differences in perceptions. I mean, they have a perception, we have a perception. But have we solved the border? No, we have not. And so, these are sometimes, in some cases like in China, a legacy of the British era, of the colonial era. But when, I think there is almost every country in the world has a massive trade deficit with China. We import about $100 billion worth from China. We export $20 billion. As far as I remember, India is the only country in the sub-region, in the subcontinent, that has more imports from its neighbors than China has. So if you're talking trade deficit between Nepal and India versus Nepal and China, Nepal is still exporting more to India than it is exporting to China. Bangladesh is exporting more to India than it is to China. Sri Lanka is exporting more to India than it is to China. So that's the first factual point. The other point is, obviously, if you are an economy of the size you are, or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or the Maldives or anyone, there will be an imbalance. It's a reality. We should live. We should face it. There will be a deficit. We face it with China. I mean, China is an economy of 18 trillion. We are 3 trillion. And I told you, but even the United States has a deficit with China. The Europeans have a deficit with China. So trade deficits, and we complain like you're doing to me, to China about our trade deficit, and the Chinese response is, it's not my problem. You improve yourself. I'm not asking you to not export to China. If you can't export to China, don't blame me. You fix your manufacturing, you fix your capability to manufacture, and my market is open. But that's easier said than done. So for Nepal, I would only suggest you can aim for trade balance. If you're importing, 10 billion from India, then you also want to export 10 billion to India. Of course, you must aspire for that. But then have a realistic, practical strategy. Count what are your assets and potential foreign exchange sources. Is it tourism? Is it hydroelectricity? Is it getting Indian investments into Nepal and then re-exporting back to China and to India and to other countries? So there is a mix of policies that are available. But with an open border, I don't see any real difficulty, except I agree that at the border, the ICP's border and customs infrastructure has to improve. But even if you make it world class, that how much of it will lead to, how much of increase in Nepal's exports to India is a question. On the EPG, I have answered. There was a question on, three questions: technology and economic and the national security kind of dimensions of it. I think it's going to become increasingly important. We have seen after the Ukraine conflict how everything in the world has become weaponized. Whether it is the dollar, whether it is trade, whether it is investment, whether it is SWIFT, whether it is energy, whether it is food, whether it is fertilizer. There is nothing left which is not weaponized. So economic security has taken a totally new dimension. And that is why everyone in the world is trying to find supply chains that do not start from China and they are from other countries. So you democratize supply chains. Insofar as technology is concerned, yes, it is. I mean, whether you look at cybersecurity, you look at the space wars that are happening. China has 800 satellites at the top. So, in every domain, this is going to become the new battleground for power and for geostrategic competition. And if you look at even just what is happening between, let's say, the United States and China on the issue of semiconductors and microprocessors and chips, it's the new war. I mean, that's the only word we use. India being Nepal's strategic depth. Well, it's the way you want to look at it. I would just say, if India can be a shock absorber for any problem in Nepal, use it. I mean, you have to be able to use India both in good times and in bad.
One or two initial questions that will open up the floor and then initiate the discussion, and then maybe we can open the floor. So over to you, sir.
Gave me that liberty. Pramod had asked me to contribute a piece for this journal. I had initially agreed to do it, but then due to some time constraints, I later on apologized. But then subsequently, completed this by making 4 very short quotations. One starting is with the famous, "Why don't they like us?" The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's question to his country's ambassador to Nepal, Ranjit Ray, in his latest book. Second, even later than that, very recently there was a talk of EPG. In fact, the chairman of the EPG from our side, Ambassador, former Foreign Minister, former Finance Minister of Nepal. His book has just come out, Rashtra for Rashtra. And there he says, India wants, I'm quoting it, a satellite state in Nepal. That's number 2. Now these are from the more political side. Number 3, the litany, I'm quoting again, the litany of reasons for the ups and downs in relations between Nepal and India are many and long. It must, however, be honestly recognized that with no country has there been as monstrous, monumental, and avoidable a failure of diplomacy as between India and Nepal. The fault, der Brutus, is not in our stars, but in our mild misjudgments on both sides. Now this is Jagat Mehta, former Indian Foreign Secretary. And then I will conclude with this small conversation. Genuinely interested to take the historically deep-rooted and widespread, close and complex India-Nepal relations to a new height. So he responds with an anecdote. A Nepali diplomat personally starts his day with Anup Jarota's puzzles and enjoys Pankaj Udas's ghazals before going to bed. Professionally, he believes good relations with India is in Nepal's own national interest and has acted accordingly to our relations we find ourselves. It is generally in the nature of political expediency to blow things out of proportion, whereas an official inertia to downplay, deny, and hide under the carpet of diplomatic niceties, conundrums long affecting Nepal-India relations. Either way, when officials misjudge and mishandle interstate relations, who suffer? Who suffer? It is the people. Isn't that what is happening to we the peoples of the United Nations, of the world, experiencing the massive failures of politics and diplomacy?
These things, then that creates different types of momentums for the countries like ours, who really believes in the uniqueness, which is entirely based on the civilizational or cultural aspect, or whatever you may call. This is this is the question that we should have tried to answer. Long time. When we talk about sovereignty, it does not necessarily create a space to cultivate the relations that we wanted to have. Because sovereignty talks about the independence and all these things, and the type of relationship that we envision is something beyond that.
Borders, emotion and sentiment as a characteristic of a small state, and how that becomes a determinant of interstate behavior as a factor of international relations. I don't think much work has been done on that. Very important point, economic aid does not translate into goodwill. Examples of Western aid and other aid, which is a very, very valid point. Again, a case study for everyone. Upcoming generation, 100% correct. Most important point, why are we not focusing on the present and the future? Excellent point related to the young generation. Last point I just want to pick up from what you said, anti-Indian sentiment and anti-Nepalese sentiment, and you elaborated in the later part of your remarks, where you said, I belong to the West, my perception is very different from Kathmandu. When you talk of anti-Indian sentiment in Nepal and anti-Nepalese sentiment in India, I will disaggregate it even further. What is the Nepalese sentiment about Nepal in Patna? What is the sentiment about Nepal in Chennai? What is the sentiment about India in Birganj? And what is it in Chapa? And what is it in near Uttarakhand? So we can keep disaggregating further and further and further and further to realize that you can.
Somewhat different from how India-Nepal bilateral relationship looks from Kathmandu or from other parts of the country, and there is genuinely a reason and necessity to see this relationship in disaggregation. I do agree with Ambassador Saran in that regard. Now, for us, Indo-Nepal relationship is not just about sentimental, culture, history, shared, kinship, that people of borderlands share, across. But it is also about, understanding the context, how this relationship has shaped. You don't have to go too far. Even go after 1947. India had just become independent. Nepal had just gained its own independence from Rana aristocracy. India was economically not in good shape. There were a lot of internal conflicts. Politically the country was also divided. There were a lot of conflicts within that country. But the economic partnership between the two countries took off immediately after India's independence. Despite shortages of resources within India, India was also taking food aid during that time from United States, if you remember. But despite all that, Nepal's all sentimental and telling you that it was out of India's large-heartedness that it did. Of course, it played a part. Being a neighbor does play a part, but it was also India's strategic choice because remember, it was a time of the Cold War, inception of the Cold War, that India did face its own insecurities vis-a-vis its own border disputes with Pakistan, which translated into war. There were conflicts from the time of the partition, and also there were border problems between India and China in the north. So whatever strategic choices India made, whatever aid choices India made, nevertheless also had the elements of its own national interest. Now, from talking from point of view of somebody as a Nepali citizen or somebody from borderlands, I would also like to talk from the point of view of an IR observer, as an IR student. There are no free lunches in international relations. We do understand. It's a tough competitive international order. There are trade-off of it. I'm not going to hold India responsible for that. As a IR professional or as an IR observer. Maybe as a citizen, I'll be more sentimental and say that as a neighbor, you should not have done that. But I think modern day India has moved beyond Gujarat doctrine. It is no more about just lack of reciprocity. Of course, India also has to look at its own interest. So if you are going to have a bilateral relationship, you also have to increase your capability. There was a question about sovereignty, I think. And when we say what is sovereignty, is it just about protecting your border, or is it also about developing your own capability to improve your bargaining power, your negotiation skills, vis-a-vis trying to protect your interest, vis-a-vis your neighbors. So I think there is a need for introspection within ourselves as well to ask ourselves, do we have sufficient capability and capacity to negotiate our interests? I think that's a question that we could take to next round of conversation. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
To see me in a Nepali attire. And quickly, you also introduced me to another guy named Ram Singh. And turned out that Ram Singh is a Nepali-speaking Nepali from Dadadura, far west. And that wasn't enough. He introduced to me with another guy named, I forgot his name, but his surname is Jha, from Janakpur, a Maithili-speaking Nepali. And I was a Nepali-speaking Nepali from Kathmandu. And I think that sums up the kind of relationship that we have with India. You have a Nepali-speaking Indian, you have a Maithili-speaking Nepali, and a Nepali-speaking Nepali in an event in Bangalore, which is around 1,000 kilometers from here. But the reason I was in Bangalore was to attend an immersion week on technology, the newest resurgence that India is coming up with, and they've named it digital public infrastructure. And I would like to, in my next 5 or 6 minutes, I'd like to outline how did India use this technology to come up into the economic strata, and at the same time how it is today using it as a tool of geopolitical push, and mainly through its presidency in G20. So it turns out that in early 2010, India wanted to have a world-class institution in terms of security, education, public enterprises. And then the government there said that, okay, if we have to establish something of a world-class with the physical infrastructure of healthcare, education, security, etc., how much would it cost? The answer came to around 10.6 trillion US dollars. And India, without any kind of physical infrastructure 10 or 15 years ago to cater to that massive growth in population, they had no way to the population. And that led to something called the digital public infrastructure. And the same also, so Facebook would decide that whom I would date. Algorithms. Right. And today when it comes to, for example, your robots playing football, and there is a goal. So the machine learning, so the entire sequence of events would be dictated the fall play. So if Facebook just promotes one political narrative, there is a fall play. But we as users, we do not know. So
secularism was Nepalese demand? Or was this throwing of a king actor was Nepalese or what? I think these things have long repercussion. And if Nepal doesn't survive, we will suffer. That's another question. And the security of South Asia also, it will depend upon this matter. This thing has to be, is it internal conspiracy or it was a foreign act? So maybe we have to think how to make Nepal survive so that everybody benefit out of it. Thank you very much.
I think what we should be more concerned about is how do we benefit from our heritage, as Hindu temples, Hindu heritage sites that are there. How do we benefit from that? How do we attract tourism from based on that? So I think the kind of bilateral partnership that is happening to augment connectivity between India and Nepal, probably it is going to lead to more Hindu pilgrims from India coming to Nepal. So let's not worry about our Hindu identity being under threat. I don't think it is under threat at all. I think if at all, more people are going to know about Nepal's heritage sites, Nepal's temples. So I think it's just about the change of institution, which was our political choice. So I don't think we should be mixing that with our identity. The second concern about sovereignty that we were talking about is how do we move from.
And it was about the youth and all. So, in India there is a notion that British ruled us, and therefore we've kind of lost so much of our identity and so on and so forth, which is true to a degree. But then India cannot get away from cricket, can you? Which Britishers brought to India.
Which we have started.
Or chai, tea. Okay, for a moment let's forget that the Britishers brought the cricket or tea. Then you go back to Taj Mahal, which India prides so much into. That was built by Mughals, they were not Indians. If you have to go back, then you'll have to go back to the Gupta Empire. The problem with our society, I think, as I engage with my son and the younger generation, is that they have no interest, but most of the people live with the nostalgia of the past. Right? We don't like to live with the hope and optimism for the future. And we don't like to believe that the future is going to be better than the past. That's what the entrepreneurs do, basically. So I think the kind of narrative that we try to build is that we try to start history from a point that is most convenient to us to make our arguments. And for today, the history that we like to begin with is Prithviraj Shah. But history was present before that. Right? So it's like an Orwellian world of 1984, where the country that Winston was in constant war with either Oceania or East Asia. So there was always a threat from these two countries, and that's how the Big Brother consolidated power. And I think if we have to be smart enough in this country, we'll have to sell the narrative to the big brothers out there, who are mostly the political leaders and who are basing themselves into kleptocracy, that don't create a common enemy for us. And they've been doing it times and again, and the common enemy on most of the occasions in India is India. Right? So we have to be very mindful of that fact. And the only way to undo that, would be to increase trade, would be to increase commerce, would be to engage with India or even other countries in a bilateral trade, so that we can have more power. That's how we build the future. That's how we need to live with the optimism for the future, and not with the nostalgia of the past.
Thank you very much, sir.
Can I ask one question?
Can I make you the last question, because I'm getting repeated reminders?
That is not in my hand, it is up to your hand.
So last question.
In hues in Vietnam, in Cambodia, and even Thailand, and many countries, including Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and even in USA and European countries. But last 20-25 years, we couldn't find I found two hydroelectricity project investment, and one is a parlay in Birganj. But there are other companies why they don't come to Nepal and invest in different way. We have cheap labor, we have now electricity, we have some infrastructure in industrial sector. So that is what I would like to know about the perception of the private sector about the investment in Nepal. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can.
In the 1400s, the Europeans took away labor from the East, right, as a factor of production, and then colonized. And after colonization of countries like India and other places, they took away all the resources and sold it back. And today what's essentially happening, and something that we need to all be mindful about as policymakers,
is that today we're turning into digital colonies because all our data is going into Silicon Valley, right? So, and every move that we make has been closely scrutinized. And for all the resources that has been taken from the east to the west, or from the global south to the global north, all we've gotten back in return is either Christianity or Coca-Cola. So we'll have to be really mindful of this fact as to how the concept of sovereignty would change in future.
Excellent, that's fantastic. Mr. Sikala, the last word.
Thank you, Ambassador. Well, first of all, you said you came back after how many years?
15.
15 years. Ambassador, I don't want you to go back with the impression that mainstream Nepalese are anti-Christians. Just have that notion out. In fact, Ranjit Ray's book, when Prime Minister Modi asked him that question, I would have outrightly started that it is a misjudgment. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I think we all realize, and in my case, I've written in many of my, this centrality of India in the future emerging global order. And as a result, South Asia's future lies in getting on the rising India bandwagon. The only question by sovereignty and all of these things that we're talking about is what is going to be the price of that ticket on that line. And so the more we understand, make it easier, the faster it's going to be for us, the better it's going to be for India. Now, final thought. I talked about, this journey that we're talking about. That's why I call it this old new journey. Old because it has to be based on our traditional common heritage, wisdom, and history and geography and all the rest. But this journey is both difficult and easy. Why? Because it must first start, and you so rightly pointed out, start because otherwise man ka andhera. It must start from man ka ujala, because we must be enlightened on the tremendous developments that are taking place in the rest of the world. Because this man ka andhera will lead us to where we are today, at the tail end of the spectrum of intellect, basking in the delusional glow of what an Indian diplomat, one of your colleagues by the way, Indian scholar diplomat calls the tragedy of mimicry. Mimicry distorts understanding of right and wrong, recognition of friend and foe. As a result, and I can give so many examples of complementary initiatives are misjudged as contradictory and misused as tools to undermine each other. Give you a small example. And examples of how we create controversies around Mata Sita and Bhagwan's Ram and Buddha. Aren't they enough? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I think you will all agree that this has been an extremely interesting conversation, and I think you will also agree that we need to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone. Thank you so much for your support.